and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Barbara Myers. On today's show, we're going to be talking about mental health for a special age range that is of youth making a transition from being teenagers to being adults. And sometimes this group is called Transition-Aged Youth, or TAY. Sometimes we use the word TAY. And I am very privileged to have a special guest with me to help us understand the special challenges of people in this age group. And her name is Sabra Mustafa. She works for Alameda County Behavioral Health Care on the Consumer Relations team, and she's also on the Pool of Consumer Champions TAY team. She helps to run that. And in addition, and importantly for this show, Sabra is a former TAY herself, and she'll be telling us her story. So welcome, Sabra.
Thank you, Barbara.
Very pleased to have you here. I thought we'd start out with just a few definitional things. Can you define what transition-aged youth is?
Okay, in Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services, transitional age youth is identified as young adults between 16 and 24.
16 to 24, Okay, so they're right on the cusp of being adults when they cross that age range.
Exactly.
And why is it important to make this kind of a distinction of transition-aged youth? What are some of the special challenges and opportunities that we have for that age range that we might not have in other age groups?
Well, we have youth, we have transitional age youth, we have adult and older adults. So there's all these different categories, and the transitional age youth are the only group that are kind of like your youth. They're children in a sense, not children, but they're young adults, but then again they're also adults. So there's certain decisions they're able to make at that age, and there's certain, life experience and things like that that they don't really necessarily have to bring on the table. So they still need a lot of help through that transitional phase.
Is it also this time period where if a person becoming psychotic, this is when it usually happens? Is it that in that age range?
Because it's at an age period where you start identifying and noticing behavioral changes, and it's really important at that age range that you're very aware and cognizant of their behavior and how it's changed from them being a child, to see if there's anything that needs to be identified, symptoms, things like that.
I imagine there might be some other thing that would be involved for this group, like maybe juvenile justice. Having a juvenile justice system.
Foster care, poverty, lack of health insurance. A lot of those factors play a part in putting them at risk at that age as well.
Are there any particular diagnoses that people have at this age range that might be different from the population as a whole?
Well, maybe you've heard a lot in the news of ADHD and things like that. Bipolarism and schizophrenia, the more severe mental health conditions, usually aren't diagnosed that early necessarily, because it's really kind of hard in a sense to be able to diagnose them in general, but to have them diagnosed at that age group is hard. So you have severe depression, ADHD, you have
that's attention deficit
disorder, hyperactivity, things that I was I wouldn't say diagnosed, but names and terms they threw around when I was that age group for me. So,
Is there a higher suicide risk?
Very, very much so. It's a very high, and that is why it's so important that we're aware of these different changes in their behavior at that age, because they're dealing with all those challenges.
Right.
So suicide is a very, very, very high risk factor for them at that age.
How about drug and alcohol abuse?
Drug and alcohol abuse is pretty prevalent, and especially marijuana use. And there's been studies that shown that at that age group, a lot of them do use drugs to self-medicate. They use alcohol to self-medicate. And because they don't have symptoms and things like that, it's not really easy to tell whether their behavior is coming from substance abuse or if it's coming from just general behavioral changes or in developmental changes that they're going through. So it's a little difficult, but it's very, very prevalent.
So you could have co-occurring disorders.
Co-occurring, exactly.
Yes. Why is it important to focus on this group and catch mental health? illnesses early?
Well, because it's one of those things where if you allow it to escalate and you don't intervene, as soon as you start seeing it occur, then it can just get worse and worse and compound. And at that age, it's like that's your first start in life. And so if that early intervention isn't there, then they can go through a whole lot of unnecessary situations and all different types of, I would say, just a lot of different types of problems that probably could have been averted if they had someone there that could guide them through it, and then kind of look and see, is this behavioral, or is it nutrition? I mean, it could be possibly that they're having nutritional deficits, or it could be a number of things. But if it's not caught early enough, it can go on for quite a long time where it escalates, and then it becomes more severe. And then you start seeing schizophrenia and bipolar, and then those symptoms start coming up. And those are usually caught at an early, or usually diagnosed, or I wouldn't say diagnosed, but usually the symptoms are usually shown early.
What would you say that the best practices would be, like the state-of-the-art for providing mental health care for the transition-aged youth? What would be the best possible type of situation for that?
Well, being that when I work with youth, I found that you really have to nurture them in a sense that you have to kind of really take a look at the whole picture. So in what I've seen that was successful in working with youth is having a real integrated approach. So looking at all areas of their life, their lifestyle, and of course cultural and social economics, all those things play a part. And then you can customize what works for them, because there's sort of a stigma of having a mental health. It's a stigma of having a mental health condition or symptoms and things, but in that age group, you get polarized or ostracized from the other youth when they feel like you're different. And so I feel like being able to educate them about their care, finding the best ways to engage them so they have hands-on in what works for them is the best way, and hopefully it'll be the way that we go.
Yeah, so that they have a say in what their treatment is going to be, and then that empowers them in some way.
Exactly, and also the arts. The arts have been proven to be very successful in reaching the youth, through music, dance, and all different types of therapeutic approaches that incorporate art. Like I myself used art therapy a lot. That really helped me. And they can use whatever their personal experiences or what they're going through, they can kind of use that as a medium to express how they feel. So that's also been proven to be well.
Can you tell us about what Alameda County is doing for transition-aged youth? What kind of initiatives they have? I know you're working in one of them.
Yes, there is a lot of wonderful things going on with youth. And with the Mental Health Services Act, which passed some years back, it actually has a component where consumers and family members have to be directly involved in the services, and it's written in there. So it kind of gives behavioral health care services a different or a new approach to providing services. So for youth, we have early intervention for psychosis, and I'm probably not saying the exact term for this particular initiative, but it's actually going to be going through right now, or it's in the process, and we'll hopefully have some programs that are directly impacting youth. And when I was on the Prevention Early Intervention Committee for the Mental Health Services Act, we had identified youth as underserved population. So once we identified them as underserved, these initiatives actually are out basically to reach those particular specific groups, and the programs and services are to hopefully reach those underserved populations, and they're included in that. So there's a lot of wonderful things going on. We have our ethnic services manager. She has a Black Utilization Committee where she's bringing in African American males and youth included in that. And then, of course, the Pool of Consumer Champions, which are actually through Alameda County directing some of how these services are going to be reaching our youth as well. So I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to see what we come up with.
So it sounds like there's a lot of peer support, but there's also advocacy and
education.
vocational training even?
All of them. We have the workforce education training. That is a component of the Mental Health Services Act, and that's going to provide jobs for consumers, as well as training them to even be providers, and also working in administration. So it's going all over the place. It's great.
Oh, that's good. It's very encouraging to hear that. I thought I would talk for a little while about the types of people and groups that would become involved in mental health care for transition-aged youth, and the kinds of people that need to be worked with. So first of all, there's the family dynamics, so what is the attitude of the parents if they're in foster care? What about the foster care family? What about brothers and sisters? What about other relatives? There might be some interactions that affect their ability to get well there. There might be a mental health history in the family that might be a factor. And also there might be a cultural background of the family that might either be unlikely to accept the fact that there would be a mental health problem in their family, and perhaps even homelessness in some of the youth. And then again, when you're dealing with youth, you probably have teachers and other school officials that would be involved possibly in crafting a type of a program. And then also there's the whole importance of being accepted by your peers. You know, you mentioned that when you're that age, it's so important to have a peer group that accepts you. And if you're somehow put as the strange one, the odd one, then that makes it very difficult. And people who are older or younger don't necessarily have that kind of peer pressure. And then, like many people, they may be just unwilling or reluctant to self-identify as a person who has a mental health problem. I know when I first had a mental health problem, I was reluctant to identify myself as that. I mean, it's just something that it's hard for a person to take in, you know, and it's a lot to ask to a youth that's brought up in the society. And then not every county is going to have that available, you know, so there may not be the services for the individuals. And then also there's whether or not there's medication that works and it's effective for people, because I know sometimes medication works differently for people who are young than people who are older. So all these things are, you know, factors that might influence, I think, the way that.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of them, a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
If you look at it like a spoked wheel with the youth being in the center of it, you have all those influences. You have your family, you have the clergy, you have the school, you have the juvenile justice, and then you have all these spokes on the wheel with the youth being there, and these are all influences, and it's like, how are they going to affect that youth? Which ones are going to be the most encouraging and impacting, and each one is different.
So that's why it's so important to have a special, you know, like you said, each person have a special program designed for them, and even with their input.
Right, and that's exactly it, their input, because the TAY Advisory Board, which is also part of Alameda County, it's one of the few, I don't know, maybe even the country, but definitely in the state, and the TAY Advisory Board is basically run through Alameda County, and they have a core group of youth that make a lot of decisions, and they actually do workshops and things at conferences, and it's all their opinions, it's all of what they want. And also the TAY director and her assistant, they do go to some of our community-based organizations and have focus groups there as well, and they get input from them. So we're finding that the best practices for the youth is to go to the youth, because that population is so, I would say it's very different from the general population, and it's really hard to reach them sometimes.
Now, what I want to do is ask a little bit about you and your story, because you yourself, when you grew up, were someone who had behavioral problems as a transition-aged youth. And I wanted to ask you what that was like for you when you were growing up.
Wow. Well, I'm going to put it in a nutshell because, I feel like I've lived 1.5 million lives. Because the thing about it is that at that age group, what I'm seeing now is not the same as what occurred when I was younger.
Right.
If I just left out all the Mental Health Services Act type of initiatives and services and programs that we're coming up with, you leave all of that out, the youth are still a whole lot different than when I was younger. And when I was growing up, I was like put out of school sometimes. I was sent home for having behavioral problems, having too much energy, and just being too unruly, And also, as I got older, I pretty much just went into, I pretty much transitioned most of my energy into music and the arts, because that's what my parents enforced. But I was like sexually abused for many years, from the age of 3 on to most of my teens, and then, I was raped like twice. So I had so much trauma that it was really, really hard for me to like manage, because I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't associate my behavior with what happened to me and the trauma, and so I didn't really have any help. And then culturally, like you had talked about, those cultural influences, like in my particular family, I can't speak for African Americans, but I had family, mostly extended, not my immediate family, that felt like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't need any meds, or, you need to just snap out of it and whatever, forget what happened, whatever. There's this approach that you don't really try and work through it. So I just, at that age, by the time I hit the transitional age youth stage, I was just coming out of college and everything, and that was when I was raped the second time, and then it just went all bad from there. It just went, it's just like, of all the suicide attempts and the cutting I did when I was younger, by the time I got to that age, it was just like, okay, I need some help. And that's when I really wished that I knew what we had here in Alameda County. And maybe it didn't exist, I don't know, but when I was that age, I was searching and hoping for something. And then after I had gotten raped the second time, that's when I found out that there is a program, I don't know if it's Alameda County or the city of Oakland, where they provide free therapy for survivors of violence. And I forgot what that program is called, but they give it to you automatically. So that was my first introduction into the system, and then that's when a bunch of other things happened there, in the hospital, inpatient, outpatient, things like that, and eventually I was transitioned into having a diagnosis, and then they're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is your what they call a treatment plan, and it incorporates therapy. And I have to admit, that helped me so much. They had art therapy, they had movement therapy. In my day therapy, they had so much different types of ways to engage me, and it didn't make me feel like I was in a room full of, I'm sorry, but like old people. It was really just very engaging. And so with that and the medication, I was able to get back on track.
So that's what made the difference, is when you finally were able to get help and you got all of these.
But they reached out when that happened. Like, unfortunately, that was how I got into the system, but if there is a way, like we do now, where we're proactively going to them first before all this stuff can happen. This is what, to me, is transformative about what's going on now, is that we're proactively reaching out to the youth, and we're not waiting for something tragic to happen and say, come to us. We have group therapy and individual therapy sessions, but we do also now say, okay, we want you to be a part of your own wellness and recovery, and that's the most
that's great. It's so good to have you there, because you know another way that didn't work as well, and you know, just from your own gut, your own reaction to it, you know that you're making the world better, turning your experience into something that's going to change the system for the better, which is, I think, really admirable. I admire you for that. What kind of art therapy did you do that did you find helpful?
Well, I like to draw, and I like to write poetry, and I always tell, like, the youth that I work with that, you don't have to be an artist. An artist is what an artist is. No one's here to judge what is considered art. So any way that you can express yourself. They allowed us to do collages, and it was framed around maybe a specific question or something, and then being, kind of exuberant. I like the movement therapy. We did a lot of movement therapy. We did acting therapy. And so all of those different means, and everyone, I don't think there was anyone in there that could say that they're a performing artist. So you go in there, I mean, just as you are, and you just perform and do, whatever makes you feel comfortable. It kind of complemented the medication. Like sometimes, you feel like medication is like, I can say right now that it's somewhat difficult, even with the youth that I talk to even want to stay on a medication plan, because no one wants to tell someone, I can't drink that or I can't do that because I'm on my meds, or, people will sometimes think they're being helpful when they say, have you taken your meds today? Those are the kind of stigmatizing things that will make me not want to identify. And then if you're with your peers, you have to, you sometimes have to maybe explain why you're behaving a certain way.
Can you tell us a little bit about the TAE Advisory Board and the things that they do?
TAE Advisory Board is a separate component. It's almost like a steering committee, so to speak, for youth. And then the Pool of Consumer Champions for Transitional Age Youth is like an offshoot of the Pool of Consumer Champions, which is a county-based organization which is ran by consumers, and it promotes advocacy, education, and self-empowerment and networking. So this would be like a youth component of the Pool of Consumer Champions for Transitional Age Youth is a youth component of the POCC, because again, their needs are special and they're different. And then I work with the Alameda County TAE Advisory Board members.
And can you give an example of something that the advisory board takes up that affects the youth?
Well, I can tell you one thing that we're about to do. We're actually, some of the facilitation trainings that I had and some other county employees have had, we found that they're not really youth-friendly. So we'll bring the youth in to help develop and work on some of these types of trainings, policies, and things. Anything that has to do with them directly, we try to get them right in it. And the TAE Advisory Board is like a group of youth that we're nurturing to get to that point where they can be self-empowering and they can do things on their own. What I'm doing right now, if best case scenario, they'll be doing this within a year, hopefully sooner.
How will somebody find out about your program or learn more about it if they wanted to, they heard this broadcast and they wanted to learn more about what you're doing?
If you contact Behavioral Health Care Services, you'll be able to speak to people that are working on it. Again, I mentioned the TAE director, Michelle Burns, and then we have Rachel Bryant, who's her assistant, and then I work with the POCC TAE. You can also call Behavioral Health Care Services. You can go on the website, Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services, and it's an acronym.org. We're going to get a website started, by the way, so most of this information that I'm mentioning now hopefully will be posted pretty soon, so people can have access to it.
Thank you. I'm going to now put out a challenge to those of you watching in the audience. Do you know someone who would be considered a transitional aged youth who may need mental health care? If so, I'd like for you to think about what you've learned in this program, what Sabra has told us, and then decide how you might act to help this person know what is available to them. It could make all the difference in the world in their lives. So that's your assignment. We talked a little bit about resources and the Pool of Consumer Champions Transition Aged Youth. Sabra Mustafa is the person who's there, and her email and her phone number are on your screen now so that you can contact her if you'd like to. The Transition Aged Youth Advisory Board is made up of, the head is Michelle Burns, and the assistant is Rachel Bryant, and their numbers and emails are on your screen, and you can contact them as well. Also, more in general, there is a national network on transition-aged youth, which you can find at the website that's on your screen, that talks about improving practices and systems and outcomes for transition-aged youth and adults between the ages of 14 and 29 with emotional and behavioral difficulties. There's lots of stuff on that website. It's very, very helpful, so take a look at it. And as we close our show, we're going to be showing some artwork that were done by some youth that are part of what Sabra's group, and also some music that was composed by one of the people that are in Sabra's group. And we thought we'd close with that rather than our normal pictures and music, because we think it's very creative and it's something that demonstrates this is the way to do things correctly. So I'd like to thank you, Sabra, for being here.
Thank you, Barbara,
and such a great guest.
Thank you.
In closing, I want to say these words by the Reverend Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage. For deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Nobody told me it would be like this. All I wanted was to make things better and shit. I gotta wake up just to smell my piss. I don't know who I am and how I got like this. When I look in the mirror, I see a monster in this body of mine. This shit says chiseled on my spine. I'm just thinking about the things that I've done in my time. And I never had a direction going in life. Being raised in the streets, not doing the right. Being raised in the streets, turn me colder than nights cold.